All right, so here's an example. It says example 2 because I reversed them and put them in the backwards order. Uh, all right, so here's what it usually looks like when you go to start coding something. Okay, you see the public class form and end class, right? That's the whole program is all contained within that. And then you can see here it says private sub form one load and end sub. This is the subroutine for when the form originally loads. So this runs as soon as you run your program. You could get to this by double clicking on the form from the when you're designing the form to get to the code for it. Of course, this would all be in Visual Basic and not in PowerPoint. So any code between this private sub and this end sub gets run right when the program opens. Okay, so this is just an easy place to put some code for testing. Okay, so I want to use a variable, and I'm just making up some little program here. I want to use a variable, so the very first thing, before I can use it, the very first thing I have to do is declare that variable. So I'm going to go ahead and declare one. And to declare it, I start by saying dim, and then I give a name to this variable, and then I say as and what type of variable it is. We're going to talk about variable types in a second, but this is one basic variable type. It's called integer. Okay, and an integer, if you don't know this from math, is a number. Okay, but it's not a decimal. So like 4, 16, -22, these are all integers. Okay, but 6.7, that's not an integer. So a whole number. So I'm saying, okay, dimension, dim, and I've named this variable add to 5 because I'm going to take this number and add it to 5, you'll see in a second, as an integer. So that's declared the variable. The computer has set aside enough space to store an integer for later. Okay, now here's the key step. I can say, all right, hey, add to 5 is equal to 7. I tell the computer, put the number 7 in that variable. Hang on to the number 7 for later. Okay, does that make sense? So before we can use the variable add to 5, we have to use the dim statement and declare that variable, give the computer a warning, hey, I'm going to be using an integer here. And then you can go ahead and say, okay, add to 5, that variable is equal to 7. I'm going to put a 7 in that variable. All right, last step, I can say, all right, the text box one.text, some text box I have on the program is equal to 5 plus the number I've stored in add to 5, 7. Okay? And so if I was to run this program, the text box would say the number 12 because it would take 5 and take 7 and add them together. So what are the key things going on here? First, we declare the variable. Then, and notice we named the variable something meaningful, right? Whatever number we put into the add to 5 variable eventually gets added to the number 5 and displayed on the text box. So again, we've declared the variable as an integer because it's going to be a basic number. And then I've set the variable equal to 7. I say, oh, hey, put a 7 in that box. So I've made the box, I put a 7 in the box, and then I took that 7 out, added 5 to it, and threw it in the text box. Right, so that's a real basic example of what you can do with a variable. Okay, there's no reason to do this, right? Because I could just put the 7 right here instead of going through the whole variable everything. But this is just an exercise. Let's try another one. Same thing. We're in a form load subroutine in the overall program. And we'll start the same way. We're going to dimension, or we're going to declare a variable from the beginning here. And this time I'm going to declare the message, the variable message to user. So I've named it message to user. I'm going to put a message to the user in here. So I've named it that so that it makes sense. So it's a name that's useful and not just a waste of time. And I'm gonna be declaring it as a string. Okay, and we'll talk more about variable types right after this. But so far we have integer, that's a basic number, and now we also have string. String is a fancy word for text. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a second. So okay, I've declared a variable. It's called message to user, and I've declared it as a string. So I've said, hey, computer, set aside some space for a piece of text here, and I'm going to call that space message to user. Okay. And then I can go ahead and set that equal to something, right? I can say the message to user is equal to, hi there user, welcome to my program. And it's getting cut off a little bit, but that's okay. You can notice how it's in quotes, right? Remember, text and not code, but text is always in quotes. That's really important. We learned that in the previous lecture. Okay, so we said, all right, first let's set aside some space for message to user, and then we set message to user. We threw in there a little message to the user. Okay, and then the last step, we can use that variable right here. So I can say message box, which if you recall, puts a little pop-up on the screen, And instead of typing the whole message again in there, I can just put the word message to user, and the computer says, okay, I'm going to go get the message from the box that we stored it in earlier. That's what the variable's for. It's for hanging on to data for later. So if I was to run this program, first the computer would set aside some space for a piece of text, for a string. Then it would put this string, hi there user, welcome to my program, and then there's little quotes at the end here. This whole piece of text will get sent into the box that the computer made, the variable message to user. And then message box, right, will get a little pop-up on the screen, and the computer will fetch this long piece of text based on the fact that we said get it from message to user. That's the name of the box where I've stored this information. So that's how a variable works. All right, so one last thing I want to talk about are two basic variable types, and we're going to learn more about variable types later. But for now, we'll just start with these two. They're called integers and strings. So there are a lot of variable types. There are 100 probably, but we're just going to start with two. The first one is an integer, and you can see, what is this, Pascal's triangle on the right. It's just a bunch of integers in there. They're basically, an integer is a whole number, okay, not 2.7 or anything like that, just a regular old whole number. Okay, so 4, 23, these are examples of integers. For our sake in computer science, if we say something in Visual Basic is an integer, this is just a little bit funky. It has to be between negative 32,768 and positive 32,767. It's because once the numbers start getting really big, then the computer hasn't set aside enough space to store that number, right? Remember, a variable is a place where the computer has set aside space. And if we say, hey, this is an integer, well, it's of a certain size, and it can't hold a number that's bigger than that. Okay, another type of variable is a string. Okay, and I've made a little picture down here on the bottom to help you think of what a string is. It's kind of like a string of letters that it's all tied together. Okay, because a string is a string of text characters. It's spaces, letters, numbers, all of them, but they're text. They're not thought of as numbers that you can do math with, but they're thought as text, letters, digits, but not numbers. Right. So, for example, hello world or welcome to my program. These are examples of strings, pieces of text. Okay, and remember when we're telling the computer we're giving it a string, we always put it in quotes, as I've done right here. A string can actually have up to 2 billion characters, so I wouldn't worry too much about how big your strings are. The computer sets aside tons of space.